But first, take us through the top stories this week. Let's bring in media writer for The Australian, Sophie Elsworth. Thank you for joining me, Sophie. We've got plenty to cover. Let's start with the latest revelations about Dr. Anthony Fauci and his involvement in the lab leak theory cover-up. Today, the New York Post reports new emails uncovered by House Republicans probing the COVID-19 pandemic reveal the deceptive nature of Dr. Anthony Fauci. They show he prompted or commissioned and had final approval on a scientific paper written specifically in February 2020 to disprove the theory that the virus leaked from a lab in Wuhan, China. The report continues. 8 weeks later, Fauci stood at a White House press conference alongside President Donald Trump and cited that paper as evidence that the lab leak theory was implausible while pretending it had nothing to do with him and he did not know the authors. Just incredibly disingenuous behaviour, and that's putting it lightly. The Republicans are digging deep into this scandal. They want to know why Dr. Fauci was so determined to discredit the lab leak theory. Could it be that he was somehow involved in gain-of-function research in the Wuhan lab that wasn't up to code? Republican Jim Jordan wants answers.
Dr. Gary's email says, I don't know how this happens in nature. It would be easy to do in a lab. That same day, February 1st, 2020. So again, right at the start, that same day, Dr. Fauci organizes a conference call. Him and Dr. Collins get on there with Dr. Gary, Dr. Anderson, all these other virologists. They get on there, and 3 days later, everybody changes their story. The same guy who said this would be easy to do in a lab says, oh, now you're crazy if you think it came from a lab. The same guy that says, I don't know how this looks engineered, he changes his story. And then the kicker is, 3 months later, those same two doctors, Dr. Anderson and Dr. Gary, get a several million dollar grant from Dr. Fauci to continue their research. So the fundamental question is, why was Dr. Fauci so consumed with making sure the narrative wasn't about the lab? I think it's because they were doing gain-of-function research there. He didn't want that out. And that was the narrative that everyone on the left bought into, even though the facts and common sense, maybe most importantly, pointed to the lab leak theory.
Sophie, this all confirms what many of us said all along, what we knew all along, that scientific debate was being shut down, not just around lockdowns and masks and all the other COVID restrictions, but also about the origins of the virus.
Rita, this is really concerning, that the lack of curiosity by the media on this, who helped almost really suppress any chance of a lab leak theory. Isn't it up for the public to decide what they make of this, for the facts to be put in front of them, not to have this dismissed by the left side of the media? And Fauci, this will be very interesting to see how this unfolds, because it appears that he had a hand in trying to discredit the lab leak theory, which to date we still don't know conclusively if that's what caused COVID.
Well, it's incredible that he would have a hand in commissioning or somehow putting together this report and then present it as evidence and not declare his involvement. And the fact that he's got the power to hand out these multi-million-dollar grants, again, we've seen trust in the expert class plummet during this ordeal, and I can understand why, but it wasn't just Dr. Fauci jumping on the lab leak cover-up. The anti-Trump activists at CNN were complicit too. The former CNN president, Jeff Zucker, ordered his staff to ignore the COVID lab leak story, referring to it as a, and I quote, Trump talking point. Again, Sophie, incredible that in the middle of a pandemic where we've locked down, masked, we've been stripped of our rights, we've got so many news outlets, like you said, incurious about the truth of how this all began, because, God forbid, they might actually help Trump if they establish his theory was correct.
It's really quite disgraceful by a large contingency of the media, Rita, in America, but not just America, all around the world. We saw it here too in Australia, where a lot of the left-leaning outlets, the public broadcaster, they were complicit in this whole lockdown, mask wearing, all the things that were pushed onto society, and they had a hand in this. They were fueling this. They were helping fuel the fears. So I think media all across the world has a lot to answer for in this, and they should be asking questions and letting people make up their own minds.
Absolutely. And as we spoke about last week, now we've got government agencies in the US concluding that lab leak was actually the most likely explanation. It's not some wild conspiracy theory anymore.